Celia is the winner of 2 Primetime Emmy Awards for Angels in America and Warm Springs. Her more than 40, let me emphasize that, 40 film credits include Sophie's Choice, The Cotton Club, Wall Street, Meet Joe Black, Zoolander, Charlie Wilson's War with Tom Hanks, The Girl on the Train, August, Osage County with Julia Roberts, The Intern starring Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, and A Quiet Place. She's, yes, very impressive.
Thank you.
She's currently executive producing the eagerly anticipated Tick, Tick, Boom, written by Jonathan Larson, the late Jonathan Larson, the author of the musical Rent, and is being directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda for Netflix. You might know Lin from the small little musical called Hamilton. So, we've prepared a little video of Celia's work, very brief. Can you please roll that if it's available?
Look up.
Are you one of those follow me to the other side voices?
No, I am no night bird. I am a messenger.
Don't dismiss me because I sit in this chair. Franklin, lock you in that baggage car. See how you like it?
Oh my God, somebody cleaned up that desk. I swear I was gonna stay late and do this myself.
Wasn't me.
Ben came in at 7 this morning and did it. Who? Ben, your intern.
Ben Whitaker. Someone's very happy.
Brilliant, thank you. Best thing that's happened around here all week.
You just happen to be on a train at the same exact moment that a woman you don't know but somehow recognize is cheating on her husband?
I know it sounds crazy.
I never saw a drunk woman in the vicinity of her house Friday night.
So we have to start with the obvious. You're a good Greek girl from Brooklyn. So where are your parents from? Let's get that out of the way so to make please everyone.
Hi, everybody, first of all. Thank you so much for staying. I'm from Brooklyn, and my father was born in Greece in the Peloponnese. He's from a little chorion called Arna, which is between Sparta and Yithion in the Taygetos Mountains. And my mother's family, she was born in the United States, but she was plenty Greek, believe me. And she's from Ionikoro, which was just opposite Arna. So, my father was a professor of classics who had been educated in Europe, in France and in Switzerland, and then came to the United States to go for his PhD at the University of Chicago, and then taught later at NYU and Brooklyn College. And he was a very distinguished classicist, and he spoke 6 languages fluently. And but the one thing he loved more than anything was American movies. He used to call it the illegitimate theater. And so he loved Westerns, Howard Hawks, John Ford, and we used to go to the movies together. We'd watch television, and we'd go to the movies together. And I think this is an old story, but he would take his PhD candidates to the New York Library, and they would meet in the trustees' room. And after they were finished, I would do my homework. In the meantime, he'd take us to the automat for, apple pie and coffee, and then we'd get to go to the movies. And this was a real thrill for me, and we always stayed until the last of the technical credits had rolled off the screen, and we looked for Greek names, naturally. And then we would just kind of try and figure out.
You still do that?
Yeah, I still do that, absolutely. And we try and figure what everybody did, and but it was, he was such a brilliant man that it was difficult to get in as a kid, and this was the way I did. And thank you. And it was just lovely. He never lived to see me do what I do for a living, but I think he would be very pleased, actually. And my mom and her brothers and sisters ran a restaurant in Brooklyn called Michelle's on Flatbush Avenue, and that was around since 1915 when my grandfather opened it. And that was kind of their life, but my mother was a very, very smart, very wonderful woman. And, growing up in the restaurant business prepares you really well for the film industry. I mean, there are so many similarities. But I always was fascinated by, the behind the scenes of it all. And I went to Carnegie Mellon University and studied creative writing, so that didn't help, but I was exposed to their departments of theater. And they had many, many different schools within the university, but theater just fascinated me. And then I learned about all the things you could do behind the scenes. And so when I got out of school, I started to work, as a secretary for a theatrical agent, and then these two guys who were film distributors, foreign film distributors. And from that, somebody came into, I know what it was. John Avildsen, who was the guy who directed Rocky, excuse me one second, was looking for a researcher. Because he was going to do a version of Robin Hood. And he was writing it with a guy called Walter Newman, who's a very famous writer. He wrote Cat Ballou, and Peter Ustinov. And he was looking for an as yet undramatized angle to, the legend of Robin of Locksley. And so he hired me as a researcher, and I knew how to use archives from my father. So, I would spit out 25 pages every few days, and I loved it. It was great, but through him I was exposed to the actual set, because I would have to go and meet with him on the set. And I said to myself, no, that's what I want to do. So eventually I quit, and I got a job at the bottom of the totem pole. I mean, really, I was a production assistant, and I already had a lot of experience kind of in life. I was in my later 20s. And I worked my way up. I did every single job you could conceivably do. But, mostly I spent a long time as a location manager, and then a production manager, then, and then a producer. And I've been a producer for quite a few years now, and it's a great job.
So long ago.
Yeah.
Well, actually, let me throw out some statistics and give everyone a little backdrop. So, gender bias exists in all forms of media. It's simply a fact, a statistical fact. Based on years of statistical analysis by the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media, the Institute found that male leads outnumber female leads 2-to-1 in the top 100 family films in the U.S. Similarly, male characters speak and appear on screen twice as often as female characters, because that's representative of life. And unfortunately, this hasn't improved in the last decade. In addition, only 8% of women are directors, coupled with 19% of producers and 13.6% of writers. So, if we were to take that Wayback Machine, when you were probably the only woman on set, how many women were on set?
Now you've got, makeup, hair, and wardrobe. They were always women.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
other than those.
Even when I started entry-level production jobs, people in the production office, the production coordinator, and the lower echelons of management were women, because somebody had to do the work. And very often, the male production manager would go out for lunch and get schnockered and come back and not be able to do anything. So that was the era that I first started in, when people really drank heavily. And so that was it. I was maybe one of a dozen, let's say. I mean, an average crew is over 100 people. So those aren't, very good. Anyway, those aren't great numbers. But today, it really is different. In the film I'm working on, directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the director of photography is a woman. The first assistant director is a woman. The production manager is a woman. I'm a woman. The other producer is a woman. And people have discovered that we're, you know, we've had to work very, very hard. And in general, we're pretty capable and pretty organized and pretty fearless, particularly in a crisis. And I just worked my way up. And I have to feel that there's something about working on film sets that people don't care, what you are, where you went to school, where you're from. If you're good at your job, they will push you up, they will promote you. And that's what happened to me, and it's happened to a lot of both women and men. So there's a certain equanimity in the culture of set work. And I think I was lucky to be there rather than the culture of studio management or, God forbid, the office of it all. But I think it's changing. I mean, certainly there are female electricians, there are female grips, there's female everything on this movie. And Lynn really loves women and trusts them. So it's quite pleasant, but things have certainly improved, over the years.
Have you seen? So it sounds like it comes from the top. You've got someone very strong
absolutely.
Who's into diversity, who's into equality, and is giving everyone who should have an opportunity that opportunity.
Yeah, give women the job, just give them the job. And, that's what Lynn did. He was very thoughtful about the people that he hired that he didn't know. He met 4 out of, each craft. He met 4 candidates. And, he generally liked the women. And, but also we wanted to achieve some kind of diversity too. So we have, African Americans, and we have a lot of Latinos and Latinas, as you can imagine. But it's nice. It's a very diverse, interesting set. It's fun to talk to people because they're different than you. And so I think it does, come from the head. A director, sometimes a producer, but most often a director sets the tone of the set and of the movie and how people comport themselves and how they relate to each other. And, there's a discipline in there if your director is a very cultured, Tony guy. I worked for both Mike Nichols for a long time and Alan Pakula, and they were gentlemen. And, that went a long way to inform the process and also, suggest to everybody how they should behave with humanity, with intelligence. So, I would say it comes from the head.
And with some respect on set. Did you find early on that you had some mentors that helped you guide you? Were they women? Were they not women? Who gave you that encouragement, those breaks that you needed? Who did you go to for that guidance? Because a mentor is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say that Alan Pakula really started me. I did a movie before Sophie's Choice. I did a movie called Rollover, and I was the assistant to the assistant to the assistant location manager. And however, I found a couple of locations that were pretty good. And he, at the end of the location scout, I was in charge of these couple of locations. We got back to the city, and he looked at me and he said, "You have a great eye." And he immediately, or shortly thereafter, hired me to be the location manager on Sophie's Choice. And then I did 5 films with him after that. He was so supportive and so wonderful. And once I got into the, traffic of film production, I had a good friend of mine called Judy Stevens that was, maybe 10 years older than I, and would always steer me in the right direction. And she was so smart, and so she was a real iconoclast, so she wasn't afraid of anything. And she was very, very influential on me and a lot of my peers, my female colleagues who did what I did or did what I used to do or what I wanted to do. they were just terrific because you had to form a little club and you had to encourage each other and you had to be brave. And I think we were. But Judy was just the greatest. But I gotta thank Alan and Mike for being very, being the way I think my father would have been. I mean, they were very, very paternal and very lovely. So.
Now, because the door was held open for you, do you turn and hold the door for others?
You bet.
And how?
You bet. I mean, it's intentional. You have to do it. You have to just take the chance. So if in an effort to achieve diversity, you have to hire people who are diverse and see how it works out. And usually, if you give people a shot, they may not do brilliantly on their first time out, but they'll learn. If they want to be in the film business for a second film, believe me, they'll learn because you can't not learn, and you really have to be pretty high functioning. And so we do that, every union today has a program for diversity and for equal opportunity employment. I know the Directors Guild of America does, and that's how my co-producer and dear friend Deb got in. We were doing the second Wall Street Money Never Sleeps for Oliver Stone, and we were able to get her into the Directors Guild because she was a minority. And that was, great for her, great for me. And so we're always looking to that. And New York is so busy now with the tax incentive that is meanwhile being lowered somewhat, but there are something like 75 or 80 TV series and probably about 15 motion pictures. I mean, we don't even have the personnel for that kind of volume of work. So a lot of people now are being, encouraged to come and work, and we'll teach you on the set. So all the unions are actually hiring people who work with them on a permit basis. But the other way is you go to Fierstein Graduate School of Cinema at Steiner College. I mean, people really can get a lot from going to school. Years ago, 30, 40 years ago, it really wasn't necessary to go to a film college. I mean, NYU, UCLA, you got where you were going because of your smarts and your wit and your whatever. But now, in this day and age, probably because the medium is so huge and there's so many venues, and it really is great to go to school. And Brooklyn College has a wonderful graduate school where Maria teaches, called the Fierstein School of Cinema. And it is a school, and unique in this. First of all, it's a public school, so it doesn't cost a gazillion dollars, and it really teaches you practically, how to compose music, what about visual effects, how to screenwrite, how to direct a camera, how do you become a cinematographer. And if you come out of an institution like that with a pretty good idea of equipment and what you're doing, I think that's really a leg up to getting people to hire you, maybe at very entry-level positions. But as I said, if you're good, somehow it happens. And not just to me, believe me, it happens to everybody who's good.
I always say cream rises to the top, based on films usually, but you're right, for people too. But Celia's being very humble because she is a founding sponsor of the Fierstein Graduate School for Cinema. And you are helping many, many, many people achieve their goals and dreams as filmmakers, and it is not an easy world. Which leads me to, if someone were to come knock on your door, what would be the best advice you would give them for finding that first job?
you have to try everything you can possibly think of, because you don't know where it's going to come from. I mean, if your aunt has some relative who was in the who was an electrician on a set, I would say prevail upon him to pass your name. I mean, there's education, like we just said, but you can really, if you're enterprising, you can get a list of all the productions that are happening in New York. You can walk into their production offices and, offer to work for the afternoon for free, offer to help. I hired a guy called Don Murphy. He walked into my office, and I don't even know what film I was doing, but he walked in, and I was all alone, and the phones were ringing, and I was answering the phone, and I looked at him, and he said he had a resume. I said, sit down, answer the phone, say production, and then I'll do it. And he was, he spent like 6 movies with him. He is now one of the biggest assistant directors there are. He works, almost exclusively for Clint Eastwood, but he works for other directors also. And he's a great guy, and he's an incredible success. But, people do that. They really do.
That's extraordinary.
So try
Sit down and answer those
of.
phones,
Yeah.
folks. So I think I want to leave everyone. We have just a few minutes, and this has gone so quickly. I wish we could do this for a lot longer. But last time we saw each other, you were heading out on the great big odyssey with a dozen relatives?
22.
22? So tell us a little bit about this, because 22 relatives in Greece is...
All with the last name Costas. My first
Checking
cousin,
in at the airport must have been...
Well, we didn't all, travel together, and we planned it. My brilliant cousin Sophia and her cousin, who was the son of the eldest of all the cousins, Jimmy, who's I think about 94 now. He was 92 then, but he'd been a runner all his life, so he was incredibly physically fit. And he wanted to go to the village, before he died. And one by one, everybody was like, oh, I'll go too. And pretty soon there were 22 of us. And we arrived in Greece, and everybody did their own thing for a week. And then we met in Athens in a series of, 15-passenger vans. And we stayed in Yithion, which is a seaside town very close to where the village is. And we just had a magical time. Every day we went up to Adna, and Jimmy would, reminisce. We'd follow him around, and he would just talk. We went to, everywhere. I think he was about 11 when he left, so it was mostly, his school, where they played, the wonderful olive, groves, and where they swam. And, we almost had a class either before or after we took these trips to the village, and Jimmy would sort of set the tone and talk about, what we were going to do that day. And then we went sightseeing. We went to everywhere else that was in the neighborhood.
22 Greek Americans
you should,
named Costas.
You should see lunch.
On a bus.
Lunch was unbelievable.
Driving through the small roads of the Hurriya.
Yeah.
What did they do when you pulled up the first day?
Well, they were expecting us.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. But my father had 9 brothers, okay? There were 10 boys. And so, naturally he would have a lot of relatives. And so, we're kind of well known. Although a couple of his brothers, one became, one was a communist, somebody else was in the resistance. I mean, they did all kinds of things. But I'll never forget, my father was very political. He was very left. And we took a trip to... we took a trip to Adna with my mother when the junta was in power. He was very opposed to them. And we were all very, nervous because he wasn't very good at keeping his mouth shut. But we took what was then a very long and circuitous drive up to the Jodió, and the car stopped. We got out of the car, and there were all these women in black, all his relatives and everybody, and there was silence. And all of a sudden, he fell to his knees and kissed the ground, and they covered him. You know, they all ran around and hugged and kissed him. It was one of the most unbelievable things I ever saw. I'll never forget it. And I'd like to use it in a film one time. But, you know, there's nothing. I mean, he was a Greek through and through. And ultimately, whatever the politics of the country, I mean, that's where his heart was and his soul. So, anyway.
Well, thank you so much. It's a privilege to have you.
Well, I don't know about that. Thank you, Joe.